Welcome to Gallery D, called Malaysia Today. Here you'll see photos in old classrooms, soldiers' uniforms, magazine covers, a flag and headdresses of the Malay rulers, and more. You'll learn about the road to independence and about a 12-year national emergency during which civil rights were severely limited and the government forcibly moved 30% of Malay's Chinese population into settlements behind barbed wire. You'll also hear about the incorporation of the states of Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore with Malaya to form Malaysia, the separation of Singapore, and economic changes. We'll end with the celebration of our diversity. Remember, before the war, Malaya was a loosely held British colony. We begin with education. The earliest schools in Malaya were established by Muslim religious teachers called Ustad, trained in Arabia. They taught the Quran, which had been dictated to Prophet Muhammad by God. They taught the Hadith, which are collections of sayings of the Prophet. They taught the Sharia, which are the rules governing life, established by scholars over the years. The teaching was conducted in villages, in sekolah pondok, which means hut schools. They were run by Ustad. Most pupils lived on site and worked to supplement the fees paid by their peasant families. They spoke Malay and read the religious texts in Arabic. They accepted that they and everything they owned belonged to the ruler. The Portuguese and the Dutch didn't venture beyond tiny Malacca. Their educational efforts were limited to their Christian needs. They mostly wanted Malay women whom their men had married and their children to read Christian texts in Malay. In the early 19th century, Chinese laborers arrived to plant gambir in Johor, to work in tin mines and in the port cities. In the late 19th century, Indian laborers, mainly Tamils, arrived to work in rubber estates, build roads and drains. The Chinese spoke many dialects, chiefly Cantonese, Hakka, Hokkien, Mandarin, and Teochew. There were also Indians who spoke Bengali, Hindustani, Punjabi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Urdu. Some of them had come to earn their livings in the fields of law, medicine, money lending, policing, railways, surveying, and teaching. The Japanese era was wartime, so they didn't put much effort into education. As the Strait settlements and the East India Company prospered, residents began to father children whom they wanted to send to school, and the company needed staff fluent in English. So it accepted the demands of British Christians that schools be established, and agreed that the schools must be open to all, not limited to certain status, ethnic, or religious groups. This is why their first school, established in 1816, was called Free. It was funded mainly by donations of British Christians and locals, and fees paid by children whose parents could afford it. The founder, Reverend Robert Hutchings of the Anglican Church, was often overworked. He died of malaria at the same age as Perak Man, 45 years. Penang Free School was the first of over 400 mission schools. Roman Catholics started their first school in 1852, Methodists in 1891. 1794, Francis Light, the founder of Penang, wrote, "Penang Chinese have everywhere people to teach their children, and sometimes they send males to China to complete their education." So it would be no surprise if, even before the Penang Free School was established, there were Chinese schools. They probably operated with a single room and a reputable scholar as teacher. The first modern Chinese school was also established in Penang. Called the School of the Fifth Happiness, it was established 3 years after the Penang Free School. Chinese schools were self-governed and self-funded. Families paid fees and contributed to special collections for building and other projects. Clan associations and Chinese philanthropists contributed funds. Today, there are nearly 1,500 schools which teach principally in Chinese. Now they receive some government funds and are subject to the government. There were also Indian, mainly Tamil schools. Though some Tamils lived in urban areas, most Tamils lived in estates. They were laborers, mostly from the suppressed classes or castes. They didn't value learning. They were poor and weren't allowed to leave the estates. So schools had to be within estates. They met in single rooms with few textbooks, let alone sports and recreational resources. The teachers were barely educated. These were schools in name only. Estate managers treated them as daycare centers where women could leave their children and go to work. Over time, due to public pressure, the government enacted laws to compel estates to establish schools. Today, there are over 500 Tamil medium schools. I return now to the Malay community. Four events are of central importance. First is the response of highly esteemed Arab Muslim religious teachers to the creation of new Arab states after World War I. Their response was to reject absolute rule by kings. They pressed for Islamic or socialist rule. Second, in 1905, the government created the Malay College Kuala Kangsar, which trained elites to help the British govern Malaya. One wag called it the Eton of the East. Third, the government faced blowback from those it trained in the Sultan Idris Government Teachers Training College, which it created in 1922 to teach in schools which it had begun creating. Many teachers rebelled against feudal rule. They propagated their ideas in popular publications. Fourth, in October 1945, the British announced that they would give large numbers of Chinese the same citizenship rights as Malays. The British announced their plans through the Malayan Union Agreement after getting consent from all the rulers. However, all the rulers boycotted the launch of the Union on the 1st of April 1946. They did so at the behest of the Malay elites, who mobilized nationwide protests against the Union and threatened to replace any ruler who supported it. Later, on the 11th of May 1946, in the Johor Palace, they launched the United Malays National Organization, a political party. UMNO, as it was called, opposed citizenship for non-Malays. It also opposed limiting the powers of the rulers and eliminating Malay privileges. It wasn't only UMNO which opposed the Malayan Union. Others opposed it too, for two main reasons. First, Singapore was the biggest source of business opportunities, jobs, and taxes, but wasn't included. This was very serious at a time when most Chinese were penniless after the Japanese occupation. Second, the Union didn't offer participative government. Instead, the governor alone would determine who would be in the highest law and policy-making body, the Legislative Assembly, and would appoint only those fluent in English. Those who opposed the Union but didn't want to go back to the pre-war arrangements which UMNO favored rallied together under an organization called Putera AMCJA, the All Malaya Council of Joint Action. The leader was Dr. Burhanuddin Al-Helmi, a Malay. His deputy was Tan Cheng Lock, a Peranakan Chinese. The next big event was the formation of the Federation of Malaya on the 1st of February 1948 to replace the Malayan Union. The interval of 21 months was a period of proposals, protests, and consultations. The British depended on the civil service to run the country. The civil service was staffed mostly by Malays who were loyal to the rulers. So the British decided to negotiate, secretly, with the rulers to form a new way to unite and govern Malaya. Though excluded, the Putra AMCJA, the Communist Party, and others, including trade unions, were active. They prepared an alternative constitution, which they completed on the 10th of August 1947. But the British ignored them. So, on the 20th of October, they brought the country to a standstill through a nationwide protest, which they called a hartal. Soon, the British crushed them. The Malayan Communist Party responded to the imposition of the Federation of Malaya by preparing for armed resistance. On the 16th of June 1948, before the MCP could execute its move underground, some of its members assassinated 3 British rubber planters. 2 days later, the government declared a state of emergency. This meant it could arrest and punish people without trial. By the end of 1948, nearly 2,000 suspected communists were imprisoned, and thousands more had been deported. And the MCP had retreated into the jungle and begun attacking government, estate, and mine workers, and bombing trucks, trains, and buildings. The British had to act against the MCP. MCP members were principally Chinese, who had fought the Japanese after the British abandoned Malaya. Naturally, the Chinese supported their relatives in the jungles, so the British had to act against the Chinese. The government cut off supplies to the resistance by forcibly relocating 500,000 Chinese from their homes into 480 settlements under the Brisk plan. The settlements were surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by armed police. Sickness was rampant. Medical help was negligible. Residents could leave only after being body searched to ensure they were not taking food, medicine, or money, which could be for the resistance. They had to return by a set time every day. The government called the settlements new villages. The residents called them concentration camps. These, together with mandatory identity cards, an effective home guard, and massive rewards for communists who surrendered or gave up their colleagues, proved effective. The government also won over the residents by providing them with piped water, electricity, schools, and clinics, even local elections, things which the communists promised. Government declared the emergency ended in 1960. To fight the resistance, the British needed lots of troops and equipment. They needed the same in Palestine. This put them under great economic pressure to exit Malaya. So even while combating the communists under a state of emergency, with human rights suspended, they continued down the path of independence for Malaya. A Cambridge-educated prince, Tunku Abdul Rahman, who had attended the Penang Free School, became president of UMNO, formed an alliance with the Chinese and Indian parties, and won a resounding victory in elections held in July 1955. His alliance won 51 of the 52 seats. In March 1956, a commission led by Lord Reed began working on a constitution. They minted a king, and the Malaysian flag replaced the British flag on the 31st of August 1957, the 7 shouts of the Malay Sanskrit word, Merdeka. A key difference between Malaysia and other post-colonial societies is the retention of pre-colonial rulers. Beginning with the Pangkor Agreement, the British signed 11 treaties with the rulers. They emphasized the rule of law. They filled government services with Malays. They created a Malay elite, understood how to negotiate with them. The post-independence fate of local rulers in India and Indonesia spurred the rulers to negotiate better terms. The long gap between 1945 and 1957, due to the communist resistance, bought the rulers time. Because of these factors, they survived. They even gained more power. The tengkolok is a headdress worn by the ruler of each state. The sultans of Johor choose to wear military hats instead. An additional tengkolok had to be created because the constitution required an additional king. Notice that I said Malaysia, although in this gallery I've focused on Malaya. I said Malaysia because in 1963, Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak were joined with Malaya to form a new nation. Sabah and Sarawak were added in order to allow the British to leave them with confidence that they would not fall into the hands of communists, whom President Sukarno of Indonesia seemed to favor. The decision to form Malaysia drew protests from both Sukarno and President Marcos of the Philippines, since Philippines, as successor to the Sulu kingdom, felt it had rights over Sabah. Indonesia launched attacks on Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak. It was easily repulsed by Commonwealth forces assembled by the British. The Manila Accord made everyone friends again. However, in 1965, Singapore became independent. This is the tengkolok of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The rulers take it in turns to serve 5-year terms as Agong, according to a schedule based on the number of years in position of each ruler on the 31st of August, 1957. One of the reasons Brunei didn't join Malaysia was that its sultan would have had to wait 45 years to be Agong. There you can read about how the face of this land changed through the construction of airports, bridges, buildings, highways, and shipping, and transformed from a tin and rubber economy to an oil palm and petroleum and manufacturing economy. Now you can take photos with models from the various people who live together in Malaysia. Thank you for listening.